I own a portrait studio, so it's fairly obvious that I would need flash in my photography and occasionally fairly large ones. But do you need flash in your photography? I mean, if you're a landscape photographer, probably not. But if you shoot people or portraits like I do, the question comes up, do you need flash? Let's explore that question in this video and help you decide if you need flash for your photography. Welcome to the channel, Hayward here. I'm going to do this video by way of examples. I'm going to talk about examples in photography and how flash would apply to them. We'll start in the studio, like I said at the beginning here. I'll show you a quick overview of how I use flash in the studio. And then we're going to move to some situations that aren't so obvious, where you could use flash or you might not use flash, and what are the implications for doing either approach. Okay, as I said, let's start off by talking about how I use strobes in the studio, which is the most common case where almost everyone would expect you would typically use a flash indoors. The reason I use flashes indoors, this is very important, is because they can bring a large amount of light into a space that's fairly dark. That's a very important point. That's your prime reason for using flash in general. They can bring a lot of light into an area that's not so bright. So in the studio, that allows me to lower my ISO for a higher quality image. I'm going to use a sample image here that I shot in black and white. It's a very typical image of the kind of portraits I do. I do very classic portrait work. In this case, this particular image shows all 5 potential flashes that I could use in the studio. Starting with the key light, we're going to talk about the key light is your main light on your subject, and that is the light you want to meter for. You've got then the fill light, which establishes the darker or shadow side. Lots of ways to talk about this, but one of the important things to remember is there's a ratio between your key light and your fill light. A large subject, not for this video, but that's your lighting ratio if you've ever heard that term. Moving on, I use an edge light. The edge light is usually an egg crate type strobe where it just puts a little bit of edge along a subject's hair or body line to separate them from the background. Similarly, I use occasionally, not always, a hair light, which is the same kind of light but on the top, where it's again, the purpose is to separate the subject from the background. And finally, the background light itself, which illuminates the background to whatever level you're trying to do. That's a very quick going around the room of 5-light portraiture, and it's a big subject. There's a lot to it. If you're interested in 5-light portraiture, hit me up in the comments and we can look at doing a video on that. That's a quick overview of how and why I use flash in the studio. Okay, let's talk about outdoor photography, where a lot of photographers, from what I've seen in comments in my videos, really struggle with how, when, why, and if they can even use flash. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you know that I use flash probably for 98% of my outdoor photography. Do I have to? No. Why do I? There's one simple reason: control. Because I cannot always choose the time of day that I do photography. Being a professional, I have to create appointments with clients. I need as much control as I can get to maintain a level of image quality that is expected of what I do. But there are times I don't use flash outdoors. I admit they're rare, but when they occur, they're fantastic. So the criteria for me not using flash outdoors, one is there sufficient light on the face of the subject without it being so bright that they have to squint, right? Not attractive. Squinting is not a good look for anyone. So if you've got the sun right in someone's face, that's never a time I'm going to use flash. The second criteria is if there's good light on the subject's face, is the background also lit in a way that I want it to be for the look I'm trying to achieve? You can often get one or the other. The trick is to get both. And it kind of has to be a special lighting situation for both of those things to happen. Okay, so what can you do to achieve those two lighting criteria if you're doing outdoor people or portrait photography? So one way to do it is to have the sun do it for you at a time of day where it just works. I'm going to use a sample image here of Kendall. This was a high school senior portrait session, and we were shooting near sunset. At the time this image was taken, the sun was very low and mostly behind trees and clouds, so it was a beautiful soft light on Kendall's face. I couldn't have lit it better myself. Because of the angle of the portrait, the background that you see tends to be next to her, so it's also lit with the same soft light, right? It's the hat trick. You've got a well-lit background, you've got a well-lit subject without light making them squint. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I couldn't do it better myself. Well, what if you don't have perfect light, but it's really close? Well, you could use a reflector, right? So the techniques we're talking about now, there are a lot of photographers who specialize in natural light photography who are masters at using reflectors and reflected light and many different techniques like this. There are photographers that call themselves natural light photographers who just went and bought a camera, however. There's a difference. A natural light photographer, a true natural light photographer, has my utmost respect because their job is really, really difficult to take the light that you find and turn it into a masterpiece. It's easier for me to add flash and make it happen, to be honest. That's why I do it. Lazy to some degree. Some of you might really be reacting to that statement that flash is actually easier, but it is. Flash is easier because it allows you to photograph in many more situations than if you're a natural light photographer who has to really, honestly, work their ass off to get a gorgeous image. But when they get it, it's worth it. It's beautiful. So natural light photographers have my utmost respect because it's very difficult to do. In the case of that image of Kendall, I happened to see it and I'm like, oh yeah, turn the flash off, let's grab this image, it's gorgeous. You see where I'm going with this? It's about control and knowing when I have to photograph. So for instance, supposing you have an appointment with a client to do photography and it's totally cloudy outside. Your reflector strategy is gone. There is nothing you can do with a reflector on a cloudy or nearly foggy day. What are you going to do? Not only is there no directional light on a cloudy day, the color of the light is somewhat of a problem too. A flash will allow you to put that puff of nice color on a subject's face, and actually they'll stand out away from a cloudy or dreary background. Okay, so another real quick example here of what I was talking about, photographing on a cloudy day. Once again, another high school senior portrait session. We do a lot of those. They're some of my favorite portraits. This of Claire, who's a ballet student, and we photographed this outside, but the day we photographed it was really pretty cloudy and there was no real directional light. But yet, look at the image we got from that session. Because I was able to impart just a little directional light, we made some stunning images. And you can punch up the contrast in post a little bit. Sometimes you have to do that. But this would have been a really boring, drab image without directional light from flash. So do you need flash? No. But if you choose not to use it, you will have to deal with these three things. 1, scout a location and know where the sun's going to be at the time you're planning to shoot and hope the sun cooperates. If it does, you're golden. 2, use a reflector to add light to your subject's face to make it balance the background exposure, etc., to get the look you're looking for. Or 3, accept the light as you find it and go create a masterpiece. I'm not kidding. As I said earlier, there are some natural light photographers and some, of course, fashion photographers who can take the light as they find it anywhere and make a masterpiece. And I, again, repeat, I highly respect photographers who can do this. I can do it. I can do it fairly well. What I can't do is set one expectation with a client for a look to be a certain way and then go on location and have the light dictate a completely different approach. I can't do that in my business. If I were a fashion photographer, I would just say, that's the look, we are doing art, right? And if you don't have constraints like I do, shoot it. You can make beautiful photography in any light if you accept that you have to work with the light and deal with what it's giving you to create your photograph. Okay, that's the ins and out of using flash or not using flash. I hope I've given you some good insights here. There's a lot to dive into and explore. If this video has spurred any questions in your mind, hit me up in the comments and we can do other videos in the future. As always, I really appreciate you viewing my videos. I appreciate it if you would give me a like or a subscription if you haven't already. Until the next video, cheers.